The cruelest invitations are the ones wrapped in a smile. That was the thought crossing Simone Carter's mind as she stood beside the floor-to-ceiling window of her Boston office, holding a cream-colored envelope that carried the unmistakable seal of Whitmore Capital. She did not need to open it to know who had sent it. Daniel Whitmore had always believed appearances mattered as much as results, and even after 3 years of divorce, his invitations still arrived with flawless calligraphy and impeccable timing. Outside, late autumn sunlight reflected across the Charles River, while the city moved with its usual confidence. Inside, Simone calmly unfolded the heavy card and read every word without changing her expression. Daniel was hosting a celebration to mark the largest acquisition in his company's history. Former colleagues, investors, journalists, and prominent business leaders from across the country would attend. Near the bottom of the invitation, written in Daniel's own handwriting, was a single sentence that no printed font could have delivered with the same quiet arrogance. "I hope you will come and celebrate how differently life turned out for both of us." Anyone else might have thrown the invitation away. Simone simply placed it on her desk beside a weathered silver ring box she had never opened since the day their marriage officially ended. Her assistant, Lauren, noticed the familiar company crest before asking carefully, "Are you really thinking about going?" Simone looked toward the skyline with a peaceful smile. Some invitations are not about the event. They are about the person sending them. Lauren hesitated. "He wants everyone to see that he won." Simone answered with remarkable calm. "People who have truly won never need an audience to prove it." Across town, Daniel stood beneath crystal chandeliers inside the ballroom, where decorators were transforming the historic hotel into an evening worthy of magazine covers. Massive floral displays lined the entrance, while technicians tested enormous digital screens that would replay the company's greatest achievements. Daniel reviewed every detail with practiced precision, but one instruction mattered more than all the others. Make sure Miss Simone Carter receives a reserved seat near the front. His event coordinator raised an eyebrow. "Your former wife?" Daniel nodded without looking up from the seating chart. "I want her to have the best view." He imagined the moment she would watch investors applaud his newest success, while remembering the modest apartment where they had once dreamed together before ambition replaced affection. Daniel believed the evening would finally close a chapter that still lingered in quiet corners of his memory. What he did not know was that life had been writing a completely different ending while he celebrated victories he could measure only in dollars. Later that afternoon, Simone entered a secure conference room where several respected scientists, attorneys, and financial advisors waited around a polished oak table. No one discussed Daniel or the upcoming gala. Their attention focused on confidential documents locked inside black leather portfolios. A representative from one of the nation's largest financial institutions smiled warmly before sliding a sealed agreement toward Simone. "Everything is ready whenever you decide." Simone signed the final page with steady confidence, thanked everyone in the room, and carefully placed a single folder into her briefcase. She neither celebrated nor spoke about its extraordinary value. As she left the building, she glanced once more at Daniel's invitation before quietly placing it beside the folder. 3 nights later, under the glow of cameras and elegant lights, the ballroom doors slowly opened, and every conversation in the room faded into silence as Simone Carter stepped inside carrying nothing more than a simple black evening clutch that held a secret capable of changing every life gathered beneath that roof. Simone paused only long enough to hand her invitation to the attendant before stepping farther into the grand ballroom, where crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors and elegantly dressed guests. Conversations that had filled the room only moments earlier faded into cautious whispers as familiar faces recognized the woman many believed had disappeared from Boston's elite business circles years ago. She wore a simple midnight blue gown with understated jewelry, making no attempt to compete with the extravagance surrounding her. Her confidence came from somewhere much quieter than appearances. Daniel noticed her almost immediately from the stage, where he had been greeting investors. A faint smile crossed his face, one carefully rehearsed long before the evening began. He excused himself from a conversation with several board members and walked directly toward her, every step measured, every expression controlled. "Simone," he said warmly enough for nearby guests to hear, "I am glad you accepted my invitation." She returned the smile with effortless composure. "It sounded like an evening you did not want me to miss." Daniel laughed softly, believing he still understood the rhythm of every conversation they would ever have. Some milestones deserve witnesses. Simone met his eyes without the slightest sign of discomfort. "I agree." The simplicity of her answer unsettled him more than any sharp reply could have. Before he could continue, several guests approached, offering polite greetings that carried equal parts curiosity and caution. Many remembered the public divorce that had filled business publications with speculation. Some expected bitterness, others expected embarrassment. Instead, they found two successful professionals exchanging courteous conversation, as though years of history rested quietly beneath carefully chosen words. Daniel introduced Simone to a few executives with practiced confidence. "My former wife," he said, emphasizing the word former just enough to remind everyone that chapter had closed. Simone acknowledged each introduction graciously, never correcting him, never adding unnecessary explanation. Across the ballroom, Daniel's mother, Evelyn Whitmore, watched with visible satisfaction. She leaned toward one of her longtime friends and whispered, "She always knew how to make an entrance. Let us see how long confidence survives when reality catches up." The remark earned a few restrained smiles from those nearby. Simone either did not hear the comment or chose not to acknowledge it. She accepted a sparkling water from a passing server and quietly admired the view overlooking Boston Harbor. Lauren's earlier question echoed faintly in her memory. He wants everyone to see that he won. Simone looked around the magnificent ballroom, not with envy, but with remarkable clarity. She remembered evenings years earlier when she and Daniel had celebrated small victories with takeout dinners and borrowed folding chairs inside their first apartment. Back then, success had meant building dreams together. Somewhere along the journey, success had become something measured by applause instead of purpose. Daniel stepped onto the stage as the orchestra fell silent. The room responded with enthusiastic applause, while enormous screens displayed images of Whitmore Capital's newest acquisition. He thanked investors, employees, and partners before speaking proudly about perseverance, vision, and leadership. As his speech continued, Simone remained quietly attentive, offering the same polite applause as every other guest. Then the ballroom doors opened once again. This time, the arriving guests were not celebrities or corporate executives expected on the evening's schedule. They were internationally respected researchers, hospital directors, university presidents, and senior partners from one of the largest investment firms in the country. One after another, they walked past Daniel without stopping. Their attention settled immediately on Simone. The first to reach her extended his hand with genuine respect. "Good evening, Chairwoman Carter. We have been looking forward to seeing you." Daniel's smile remained on his face, but for the first time that evening, uncertainty quietly replaced confidence as he watched the most influential newcomers in the room gather around the woman he believed had arrived alone. Daniel remained on the stage, his prepared remarks suddenly feeling far less important than the unexpected gathering forming around Simone. The applause that had moments earlier celebrated Whitmore Capital quietly dissolved into curious conversations as guests watched internationally respected leaders greet her with unmistakable admiration. One hospital president thanked her for attending. A Nobel Prize-nominated medical researcher asked whether she had finalized the timeline for the upcoming announcement. The senior managing partner of Ashcroft Global Investments smiled warmly before saying, "Chairwoman Carter, our board unanimously approved the final commitment this morning. We are honored to stand beside you." Simone thanked each of them with calm professionalism, never raising her voice and never drawing unnecessary attention to herself. She introduced several of the researchers to one another, asking thoughtful questions about clinical partnerships and patient access rather than financial returns. Daniel observed the conversation from only a few yards away, struggling to understand what he was seeing. 3 years earlier, Simone had walked away from their marriage, carrying little more than a few personal belongings and the research proposal he had once dismissed as unrealistic. Now, people whose names regularly appeared in international business publications treated her as an equal. Evelyn Whitmore approached Daniel with visible concern hidden beneath practiced composure. "Who are these people?" she asked quietly. Daniel answered without taking his eyes off Simone. "I recognize most of them. They do not attend events without a very good reason." His chief financial officer stepped beside him, holding a tablet. "Daniel, I have been trying to identify the organization they mentioned." He lowered his voice even further. "There is almost nothing public about it. Whatever they are building has been operating under private ownership for years." Daniel accepted the tablet and scanned the limited information available. The organization had no flashy advertising, no interviews, and no public celebration of its achievements. Instead, it quietly funded medical research, biotechnology innovation, and university partnerships across the country. The chairperson listed at the top of the organizational structure was Simone Carter. Before Daniel could absorb the discovery, the master of ceremonies returned to the stage and announced a brief intermission before the evening's keynote presentation. Guests dispersed throughout the ballroom, but the largest crowd continued surrounding Simone. She remained gracious, making sure every researcher and physician received time to speak. Daniel noticed something that unsettled him even more than her growing influence. Nobody treated her like a wealthy investor searching for attention. They treated her like someone whose judgment they deeply trusted. A distinguished physician wearing the lapel pin of one of the nation's leading teaching hospitals smiled as he accepted a folder from Simone. "Without your support, this project would still exist only on paper," he said sincerely. "Thousands of families may benefit because you refuse to abandon the work." Daniel felt an unexpected memory surface. Years ago, he had sat across the kitchen table from Simone while she excitedly explained the same research idea using hand-drawn diagrams spread across legal pads. He remembered encouraging her to pursue corporate law instead, insisting that scientific innovation required impossible amounts of time and money. At the time, he believed he was protecting their future. Now he wondered whether he had simply failed to recognize hers. As the orchestra resumed playing softly, Carter Hayes entered the ballroom carrying a slim black portfolio. He walked directly toward Simone, greeted her with professional respect, and handed her the case. "The board has signed every page," he said. "Whenever you are ready, history can officially begin." Daniel watched Simone rest one hand lightly on the portfolio before offering a small nod. She did not open it. She did not announce its contents. Yet the expressions on the faces surrounding her made one truth impossible to ignore. Whatever rested inside that ordinary black case had become more valuable than the acquisition Daniel had spent years preparing to celebrate, and for the first time in his career, he realized the most important story unfolding that evening was no longer his own. The ballroom gradually returned to its polished rhythm, yet an unmistakable shift had settled over the evening. Conversations that had revolved around Whitmore Capital now drifted toward quiet questions about Simone Carter and the confidential initiative that had drawn some of the most respected names in medicine, finance, and scientific research into the same room. Daniel excused himself from several investors and walked toward a quieter corner where his chief financial officer had already gathered every public record available. The information remained surprisingly limited. There were no magazine profiles, no television interviews, and no carefully crafted publicity campaigns. The organization behind Simone's work had spent years operating almost invisibly, funding laboratories, university partnerships, and early-stage biotechnology research through private capital. Every project emphasized long-term medical impact rather than immediate financial return. Daniel read every page twice before lowering the tablet. "How is this possible?" he asked quietly. His chief financial officer answered honestly, "Because whoever built this never wanted attention. They wanted results." Those words lingered longer than Daniel expected. He remembered countless evenings during their marriage when Simone stayed awake reviewing research papers after finishing demanding legal work. She had spoken passionately about helping bridge the gap between scientific discovery and patients waiting for treatments that often arrived too late. Daniel had admired her intelligence, but he had underestimated the determination behind her quiet voice. He believed success required focusing on predictable investments, not uncertain research that could consume years without guarantees. At the time, he had considered himself practical. Tonight, that certainty no longer felt like wisdom. Across the ballroom, Simone continued speaking with researchers whose expressions reflected genuine gratitude instead of professional obligation. A pediatric oncologist thanked her for protecting a promising clinical program after traditional investors had withdrawn. A university president described scholarships that had already supported hundreds of young scientists from underserved communities. Simone accepted every compliment with the same modest response. The people doing the research deserve the credit. I only believed they should have the opportunity. Daniel watched from a distance, realizing that she had become exactly the kind of leader she once hoped to be, only without the public recognition most executives pursued. Evelyn approached him again, her confidence noticeably weakened. "Surely this is some charitable foundation," she said. "It cannot possibly threaten companies the size of ours." Before Daniel could answer, Carter Hayes joined the conversation with calm professionalism. "Mrs. Whitmore, it is considerably more than a charitable foundation." He spoke politely, offering neither arrogance nor apology. Chairwoman Carter's organization recently completed the acquisition of several advanced biotechnology patents and finalized strategic partnerships with major hospital systems across the country. The long-term commercial value is extraordinary, but the mission has always been patient access before profit. Daniel looked directly at Carter. "Why keep everything private?" Carter smiled faintly, because she remembered what happened the last time someone told her the dream was unrealistic. She decided the work would speak before she ever did. Those words reached deeper than Daniel wanted to admit. A memory surfaced with painful clarity. 3 years before the divorce, Simone had spread sketches and financial projections across their dining room table, explaining how legal expertise, scientific innovation, and responsible investment could transform medical research. Daniel had interrupted gently but firmly. "You are chasing something too big for one person." Simone had answered quietly, "Then I will spend my life proving it is not." He remembered kissing her forehead before leaving for another meeting. Convinced experience had made him wiser than hope. Now he understood that he had mistaken caution for vision. At that moment, the ballroom lights dimmed once more as the master of ceremonies returned to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "before tonight concludes, we have been asked to recognize a partnership that will influence the future of medical innovation across the United States." Daniel instinctively looked toward Simone. She remained composed, one hand resting lightly on the unopened black portfolio, while every respected guest surrounding her seemed to understand that the next few minutes would reveal a truth capable of changing far more than the outcome of a single evening. The ballroom fell silent, as the large screen behind the stage displayed a single name that changed the atmosphere of the entire room. Simone Carter stood beneath the warm lights, while the audience waited for an explanation. Daniel watched from his seat, surrounded by investors who only minutes earlier had been discussing his company's future. Now every conversation had shifted toward the woman he once believed had walked away with nothing. The presentation began with a short video showing laboratories, medical teams, and families whose lives had been affected by years of careful research. There were no dramatic claims, no exaggerated promises, only real stories from doctors and scientists who had spent years working toward solutions for complex medical challenges. When the video ended, Carter Hayes stepped onto the stage. "Tonight is not about a company valuation," he said. "It is about recognizing the vision of someone who refused to abandon an idea simply because others could not see its potential." The audience turned toward Simone as she joined him. She accepted the microphone with the same calm confidence she had carried throughout the evening. "Innovation is never created by one person," she said. "It is created by people willing to continue when the results are not immediate and the recognition does not arrive." Daniel listened carefully. Years ago, he had mistaken her patience for uncertainty. He had believed ambition only counted when it produced quick financial results. Now he watched thousands of hours of unseen effort transform into something respected around the world. The final announcement revealed that Simone's organization had secured partnerships valued at several $billion to expand research facilities, support medical programs, and accelerate development of new technologies. The number appeared on the screen, but the reaction in the room was not excitement about money. It was respect for what the funding represented. Daniel noticed something that surprised him. Simone never looked toward him for approval. She did not search for his reaction or wait for him to acknowledge what she had achieved. She had already moved beyond needing anything from him. After the presentation, guests surrounded Simone with congratulations. Daniel remained seated for several moments, allowing the reality of the evening to settle. The woman he invited, hoping to make her feel small, had entered the room, carrying a future far larger than anything he had imagined. When he finally approached her, the confidence he usually carried into every negotiation was gone. "Simone," he said quietly. She turned toward him. "Congratulations," he continued. "What you built is extraordinary." She accepted the compliment with a respectful nod. "Thank you." The simple response made him realize how different she was from the woman he remembered. The Simone from years ago would have wanted him to understand how much his doubts had hurt her. This Simone no longer needed to prove anything. Daniel looked at the crowd surrounding her, then back at the person standing in front of him. "I owe you an apology," he said. Simone did not immediately answer. Instead, she looked across the ballroom, where photographs of Whitmore Capital's success still remained displayed from the beginning of the event. "An apology matters," she said softly. "But understanding matters more." Daniel lowered his eyes, realizing that the greatest distance between them had never been measured in miles or years. It had been measured in everything he failed to see while she was standing beside him. As the evening continued, one question remained unanswered in Daniel's mind. What had Simone truly carried with her when she left their marriage? And why had she never told him that the dream he dismissed had become something capable of changing the world? Long after the final guest left the ballroom, Daniel remained alone beneath the fading lights, while workers quietly dismantled the stage that had been designed to celebrate his greatest corporate victory. The applause still echoed faintly in his memory, but it no longer belonged to him. Every compliment he had received that evening had been overshadowed by a single realization. The woman he once believed had abandoned an impossible dream had simply continued walking after he chose to stop beside her. The following morning, Daniel canceled his first 3 meetings and drove to a small storage building on the outskirts of Boston, where boxes from his old apartment had remained untouched since the divorce. Dust covered forgotten furniture, framed photographs, and unopened cartons filled with years neither of them had wanted to revisit. He searched quietly until he found a weathered cardboard box labeled Simone. Inside were notebooks, engineering sketches, legal research, and handwritten proposals, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Daniel carefully opened the first notebook. Every page revealed the same careful handwriting he remembered from their earliest years together. Detailed business models sat beside scientific diagrams, followed by legal frameworks, explaining how breakthrough medical discoveries could reach hospitals faster without sacrificing patient safety. Dates written in the margins told a story he had never noticed while living beside her. Many of the ideas stretched back years before their marriage ended. She had never treated the project as a passing ambition. It had always been her life's work. Daniel closed the notebook slowly, as another memory surfaced with painful clarity. One rainy evening, nearly 5 years before the divorce, Simone had spread similar pages across their dining room table. She had looked at him with unmistakable excitement. If the legal structure protects the research instead of controlling it, investors will eventually trust the science, she had explained. Daniel remembered smiling politely before answering with practical confidence. "You are brilliant, Simone, but this could take decades. We should focus on opportunities with predictable returns." At the time, he believed he was protecting both of them from disappointment. Looking at the notebooks now, he realized he had not questioned the quality of her vision. He had questioned her ability to achieve it. That difference weighed heavily on him. Later that afternoon, Daniel requested a private meeting with Carter Hayes. hoping to understand the years that existed between the woman he once knew and the leader the world now respected. Carter welcomed him into a modest conference room overlooking the Charles River. There were no extravagant displays of wealth, only shelves filled with medical journals and photographs of research teams celebrating quiet milestones. Daniel spoke first. "I need to know when everything changed." Carter offered a thoughtful smile. "Nothing changed overnight. That is the part most people never see." He opened a thin folder containing newspaper clippings, grant approvals, and early rejection letters. For the first 4 years, almost every major investor declined her proposals. Some said the research was too ambitious. Others believed the commercial risks were too high. She never argued with them. She simply revised the plan and tried again. Daniel turned each page more slowly than the last. Every rejection had been answered with another improvement, another partnership, another step forward. Carter continued. There were months when she worked full-time as an attorney just to keep funding the research. She sold her condominium instead of abandoning the project. She never blamed anyone for doubting her. She only believed it was her responsibility to keep earning their trust. Daniel lowered the final document onto the table, overwhelmed by the quiet perseverance he had never witnessed, because he stopped paying attention long before success arrived. Carter stood and walked toward the window overlooking the river. "You once thought she needed someone to believe in her," he said calmly. "The truth is, she believed in herself long enough for the rest of the world to finally catch up." Daniel looked once more at the years of determination spread across the conference table, realizing that the greatest fortune Simone had built was never measured in billions of dollars, but in the unwavering conviction that survived even after the person she loved most failed to recognize it. 1 year later, the grand ballroom overlooking Boston Harbor welcomed many of the same business leaders who had attended Daniel Whitmore's celebration. Yet the atmosphere felt completely different. There were no whispers about failure, no quiet judgments hidden behind polite smiles, and no carefully arranged opportunity for anyone to embarrass another guest. The evening honored a national partnership that had expanded advanced medical research into hospitals across the United States, creating opportunities that countless families had once believed impossible. Daniel entered without seeking the attention that had once mattered so much to him. Success had taught him confidence, but humility had taught him something far more valuable. He greeted employees by name, thanked volunteers before speaking with investors, and quietly accepted that leadership meant serving something larger than personal recognition. Across the room, Simone Carter spoke with physicians, university researchers, and young entrepreneurs who admired her work, not because of the billions of dollars connected to it, but because every decision she made reflected the same principle she had defended for years. Innovation existed to improve lives before it improved balance sheets. When Daniel approached, Simone smiled with genuine warmth rather than careful distance. Time had not erased the past, but it had transformed the way both of them carried it. "Congratulations," Daniel said sincerely. "The newest expansion will help thousands of families." Simone nodded gratefully. "Only because many people chose to believe after so many years of uncertainty," Daniel answered quietly. "I was one of the last people to understand." She looked at him for a thoughtful moment before replying. "Understanding arrives when people are willing to replace pride with honesty." There was no bitterness in her voice, only calm wisdom earned through years of perseverance. Later that evening, the Master of Ceremonies invited both of them onto the stage to recognize the partnership between Whitmore Capital and the Carter Foundation for Medical Innovation. The audience applauded as Daniel accepted the microphone. He paused longer than anyone expected before speaking. "Several years ago, I believed success meant proving other people wrong. I eventually discovered that real success begins when we are willing to admit that we were wrong ourselves." The room became completely silent. Daniel continued without looking away from the audience. "The person who taught me that lesson is standing beside me tonight. Simone Carter never stopped believing in a vision simply because someone else failed to understand it. She did not answer doubt with anger. She answered it with patience, discipline, and extraordinary work. The future we celebrate this evening exists because she refused to surrender her principles." Applause filled the ballroom. But Daniel stepped back instead of remaining at the center of attention. Simone accepted the recognition with quiet grace, thanking every researcher, physician, engineer, attorney, investor, and student who had contributed to the mission. She reminded the audience that meaningful progress always belonged to teams rather than individuals. After the ceremony ended, guests slowly gathered near the harbor terrace, where the city lights reflected across the calm water. Daniel and Simone stood together for a few peaceful moments, watching young researchers celebrate the grants that would launch the next generation of discoveries. Daniel smiled gently. "Years ago, I invited you into a room because I believed public embarrassment would prove I had moved on. Instead, you walked through those doors, carrying a future that changed every life in this room, including mine." Simone looked toward the harbor, where a lighthouse cast its steady beam across the dark water. "The greatest victories are never about proving someone else wrong," she said softly. "They are about remaining faithful to the person you were always meant to become." Daniel nodded with complete understanding. He no longer measured the evening by applause, headlines, or financial success. The greatest gift he received was the opportunity to become a better man than the one who had once mistaken arrogance for strength. Together they left the ballroom surrounded not by triumph over one another, but by mutual respect, restored dignity, and the quiet certainty that the most valuable secret had never been measured in billions of dollars. It had always been the courage to keep believing in truth, purpose, and character, long before the rest of the world finally recognized their worth.